Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today we're embarking on a deep dive into a truly compelling work, Libertad by Javier Milei. Now, this book isn't just an academic text. It's really presented as a powerful manifesto. It challenges a lot of long-held assumptions about how societies function and, well, what truly drives prosperity.
Exactly. It's definitely provocative. At its core, Libertad offers this radical vision. It argues the state isn't just inefficient, but is, in fact, the primary enemy, the main source of societal decline.
The enemy. That's strong language right from the start.
It is. The book champions, radical individual liberty and completely unfettered free markets as the only pathways to genuine prosperity. It's a relentless critique of collectivism, government intervention, central banks, all of it. And it ultimately proposes these fundamental reforms to, as it sees it, unleash human potential. So our mission here is to unpack these arguments, pull out the key insights directly from the source material you provided, and really help you understand this very distinct worldview.
Sounds like quite the ride. Okay, so let's begin with that central idea, the state as the ultimate problem. You mentioned it opens with a quote from Jorge Luis Borges.
Yeah, the Argentine writer. The most urgent problem of our era is the gradual intrusion of the state into the acts of the individual. And the book argues the consequence of this intrusion. Well, it asserts that Argentina's historical decline over the last 80 years isn't just down to bad policies.
Okay, so it's deeper than just policy mistakes.
Much deeper, according to the book. It stems from what it calls a mistaken way of thinking, whole societal mindset. It even calls it the religion of the state, like a collective indoctrination that, interestingly, primarily benefits the political class itself. It's a powerful claim, suggesting the problem is deeply cultural, not just administrative.
That really flips the script, doesn't it? Thinking of it as a cultural issue first. And then the book takes this idea even further. It argues that getting involved in traditional politics too early, before society has really bought into liberal ideas, is actually counterproductive.
Right. They claim politics doesn't fundamentally change anything. It just gives a stamp of approval to what society has already implicitly accepted. The example they use is the divorce law in Argentina. People were already divorcing, finding ways around the system for decades before it was officially legalized.
So politicians just sort of formalized an existing reality and took the credit.
That's the argument. So if politics is secondary, just a reflection, then what's the primary battlefield?
Good question. What do they say comes first?
This is crucial for them. The real work, it argues, is this cultural battle, a long-term hand-to-hand fight waged over years to fundamentally shift public mentality away from collectivism.
And they think classical liberalism lost this battle.
Precisely. Because, the book posits, it conceded the very existence of the state right from the beginning.
Which leads them to what they call the first contradiction of classical liberalism. They argue classical liberals accepted the state to protect private property, which, sounds reasonable on the surface.
Seems logical, yeah. But the book highlights the inherent paradox. The state's means like collecting taxes are, by definition, coercive, violent even. So to protect your property, the state violates your property by taking a chunk of it. It's framed almost like a legitimized protection racket.
That's pretty stark framing. Wow.
It is, and it's central. Connecting this to the bigger picture, the book contends that capitalism definitively won the productivity debate after the Berlin Wall fell. It points to clear examples: West versus East Germany, South versus North Korea, Austria versus Hungary, Hong Kong versus mainland China. The economic difference was just undeniable.
So the evidence on producing wealth was overwhelming.
According to the book, yes. So it claims socialists then shifted their attack from productivity to the moral ground, arguing capitalism is unjust. This shift, they say, meant needing to go back to philosophical roots, which the book finds in the Austrian School of Economics.
And they specifically mention Ludwig von Mises.
Yes, noting he basically predicted the Great Depression back in 1912 in his theory of money and credit. He detailed the risks of manipulating interest rates, even proposed free banking with 100% reserves back then.
But they also find fault with Friedrich Hayek, Mises' main disciple. What was the issue there?
The book calls it a grave error. It argues Hayek, during the Depression, didn't fully grasp that his pure liberal model couldn't really work alongside central banks and fractional reserves.
Okay, can you quickly unpack fractional reserves versus 100% reserves for us?
Sure. So fractional reserves means banks hold only a fraction, a small percentage, of your deposits and lend out the rest. This process actually creates new money in the system. 100% reserves, on the other hand, means banks would have to hold every single dollar deposited. They couldn't create new money just by making loans based on those deposits. So the critique of Hayek is that he didn't push for dismantling central banking entirely to resolve this fundamental conflict in the system.
That's fascinating. Okay, so shifting gears from the critique of the state, let's unpack what the book champions. The institutions of capitalism. They argue progressive taxes, for instance, aren't just unjust, but lead towards totalitarianism. How do they justify that leap?
Well, the argument is that progressive taxes violently redistribute what the market has already allocated based on value provided to consumers. It effectively punishes success, treats people unequally before the law, simply based on how much they earn. They see it as a direct attack on individual liberty and property rights, which are foundational for them. What's key here is the book's deep dive into how capitalism works, identifying entrepreneurs guided by what consumers want.
With profits and losses acting as signals, right?
Exactly. Indispensable signals for where resources should go. Profits, they explain, pop up when someone correctly guesses what the market needs or finds a better way to produce something. But those profits disappear once others copy the idea and the market adjusts. It's not about exploitation. It's a dynamic response to what people actually want.
So if profits are just temporary signals, what does that tell us about markets versus governments in solving problems?
It implies a sort of built-in self-correcting mechanism in markets. An entrepreneur sees a need, earns a profit meeting it, but that profit acts like a beacon, attracting competitors. Competition then pushes prices down, benefiting consumers. It's this continuous decentralized process of adaptation and innovation, all driven by voluntary exchange, not top-down command.
And the book lays out 4 key institutions of capitalism.
Yeah, 4 inseparable ones. Private property, free markets, competition, and the division and combination of labor. They bring up Adam Smith's famous pin factory example to show how the division of labor just massively boosts productivity.
How big was that boost again?
Smith figured one person working alone might make, say, 20 pins a day, but divide up the tasks, let people specialize, and a small group could churn out maybe 5,000 pins per person per day.
Wow. Yeah, a huge difference. And what about competition? It often gets a bad rap called savage or destructive. How does the book defend it?
That's an important distinction they make. While it can seem ruthless, they argue competition constantly pushes production into the hands of those who can do it most efficiently. This fosters nonstop innovation, drives down costs, and ultimately improves real wages and just general well-being for consumers. It's framed as a form of economic cooperation, believe it or not, driven by self-interest rather than just mutual destruction. Critics, the book says, often miss how it benefits the consumer with better stuff at lower prices.
So what does this all mean for us, the listener? The book argues historical growth, especially in the last couple of centuries, has been, well, miraculous seems like the right word. I mean, think about trying to explain our world today. Average lifespans tripled, clean water, electricity, cars, planes, moon landings. To someone from, say, 2,000 years ago, they'd think you were crazy.
And that's exactly the point they're making. Global GDP per capita has multiplied dramatically. The book highlights that while world GDP per capita went up about 19.5 times over 2 millennia, a staggering 13.9 of that multiple happened in just the last 200 years. And that's even with the population multiplying sevenfold. This whole phenomenon, including the convergence of developing nations, what we call emerging economies, suggests a path towards, well, radical abundance, not scarcity.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Yeah.
The book talks about Paul Romer's work, inspired by Schumpeter, explaining growth through the economy of ideas. So innovation isn't accidental, it's intentional, it costs money, and it creates these temporary monopolies through things like patents. Why is that temporary monopoly part important?
It's vital because it gives innovators the incentive they need to actually invest heavily in R&D. They need some assurance that their costly efforts to create new knowledge will give them a temporary edge before everyone else catches up. And crucially, the book highlights that knowledge itself is non-rival and partially excludable.
Right. Can you quickly break down what non-rival and partially excludable mean in this context?
Absolutely. Non-rival means my using knowledge doesn't stop you from using it. Think of a recipe. We can both use the same recipe without diminishing its value. Partially excludable means that while it's tough to keep knowledge totally secret forever, you can control access for a while, often through patents or copyrights. This unique nature of knowledge leads to increasing returns and, critically, this almost infinite potential for new ideas.
Infinite potential.
Practically speaking, yes. It makes you wonder, why do we always seem to underestimate the possibilities for new discoveries? The book even does this calculation. The number of coherent ideas possible in just a 100-word English paragraph is astronomical, vastly exceeding the number of particles in the known universe.
That really puts human innovation potential into a mind-boggling perspective. Okay, so pulling these threads together, what does the book see as the essential ingredients for successful growth?
It lists several key things. Robust free markets, obviously. Strong incentives for production and innovation. Intense competition. Also, significant investment in human capital education, skills for adaptability, high savings rates, and a very, very specific limited role for the public sector, mostly just certain essential infrastructure. And critically, sound economic policy is paramount. Low inflation, they say low inflation economies grow 3 points faster, no parallel markets, minimal fiscal deficit, and open trade.
Okay, now let's circle back to that central enemy idea, the state. The book calls it the supreme aggressor, even a criminal organization because it can legally use force. What's the fundamental consequence of that, according to the book?
It argues the state inherently creates two classes, net taxpayers and net tax consumers. The book provocatively labels the latter parasites. Basically, people who get their income through coercive means taxes versus those who earn it through voluntary exchange in the market. This split is absolutely central to their view of the state. It's predatory.
And the argument is that government intervention, even if well-intentioned, just inevitably leads to the public sector growing and growing.
Exactly. They cite Hayek's road to serfdom as the classic warning. Each intervention creates unforeseen negative side effects.
Which then leads to calls for more intervention to fix the new problems.
Precisely. Leading to more taxes, more debt, more inflation. They even claim the difference between state interventionism, socialism, and communism is just a matter of degree, not fundamental type.
Can you give us a sense of how they apply this to Argentina's history?
Definitely. The book points to a consistent pattern. Historical fiscal deficits driving crises. They mention the Rodrigazo in 75, hyperinflation, social chaos, and the 2001-2002 convertibility crisis, deep recession, financial meltdown. They note these happened with deficits around 7% to 14% of GDP, and then highlight the current deficit around 10-11% of GDP as a huge red flag.
Wow. And the book really doesn't pull any punches on taxes, does it? Calling them involuntary servitude, even slavery. What's the logic behind such extreme comparisons?
The argument is that taxes fundamentally warp how resources get allocated. They forcibly take wealth that the market already distributed based on voluntary deals. This creates what they see as an artificial distribution problem. That wealth, they claim, then gets funneled to exploiters, those living off taxes taken from others. The slavery comparison comes from the idea that part of your labor, your output, is just taken coercively, diminishing your ownership over your own effort.
And public spending, portrayed as inherently wasteful. That famous line about politicians spending others' money on others.
Yes, which the book labels the state of malaise. And the whole idea of public property is dismissed as a fallacy.
Why a fallacy?
They argue politicians are just temporary managers. They have an incentive to squeeze public assets for short-term political gain because they don't own the long-term capital value, only the current use. It's about the difference in incentives between temporary political control and actual private ownership.
They also single out the Argentine pension system, calling it an intergenerational scam. Where did that come from and what's the critique?
They trace it back to Bismarck in the 1880s, claiming it started as a way to fund government officials. Bismarck set retirement at 70 when life expectancy was only 43, so it's basically a transfer from workers to the elite who live longer. Now, it's described as this demographic time bomb. It diverts huge amounts of money from things like education and health towards the elderly, simply because there are way more retirees relative to workers paying in.
Which raises a big question. If growth depends so much on human capital, on a skilled population, what happens when systems like pensions or other state actions neglect it?
The book points directly to Argentina's poor PISA test results as evidence of this damage. PISA, for listeners, is that international student assessment program. Despite spending more on education, Argentina's results are weak. Like in 2012, 2/3 of students were below the basic math level, compared to less than a quarter in OECD countries. They also argue that unrestricted university entry drags down academic standards overall because it weakens incentives for kids to excel in secondary school.
Okay, then the book turns to inflation, unequivocally stating it's always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, a hidden tax.
Right, a tax on the people. The mechanism they describe is that it benefits whoever gets the newly printed money first, usually politicians and connected groups, at the expense of everyone else holding the currency. It destroys savings, messes up investment calculations, erodes wages. It's presented as this sneaky way to transfer wealth without having to pass an actual tax law.
So connecting this to the bigger picture,
Yep.
how does the book critique central banks, especially Argentina's the BCRA?
Oh, it's incredibly harsh. Argentina's BCRA is called monetarily pyromaniac. It blames central banks everywhere for causing artificial credit booms, which inevitably lead to busts, those recurrent economic cycles. The conclusion is that central banks, maybe set up with good intentions to stabilize things, have just become tools for political spending. This leads to chronic inflation, destruction of capital, and ultimately people just lose faith in the whole system. They fight the BCRA's nationalization in 1946. Money growth spiked to 133% annually. Inflation hit 167%. Massive devaluation.
So, after tearing down the existing system piece by piece, what's the proposed solution in Libertad? It sounds like it has to be radical.
It absolutely is. The book argues all the real engines of growth, savings, investment, capital, technology, human capital, entrepreneurs, they're all severely damaged by the state. So the only solution, they claim, is radical. Shrink the state fast and dramatically, not gradually. They argue all gradual approaches in Argentina since 1952 have failed.
And the centerpiece of this is the monetary reform. Get rid of the central bank entirely. How would that even work?
They propose a system where basic value storage, like your checking account deposits, has to be 100% reserved. Banks can't lend that money out. That's completely separate from investment banking, which would deal with actual savings meant for investment. It would also mean ditching most financial regulations and allowing currency competition.
Currency competition. So people can just use dollars or euros or gold.
Exactly. The implication is a move towards dollarization, or maybe a gold standard, with the dollar or gold likely becoming dominant because of Argentina's history of, well, monetary chaos.
And what's the end game? What does the book claim this radical vision would achieve?
They argue it would completely end banking crises, stop those artificial credit booms and busts, eliminate inflation permanently, and guarantee stable, sustained economic growth. Why? Because credit would finally align only with genuine savings in the economy. It's all about bringing the financial system back into line with what they see as fundamental property rights. That, they assert, is the only way Argentina can finally achieve lasting prosperity.
We've just unpacked a truly bold and definitely uncompromising vision for economic prosperity and individual liberty from Libertad by Javier Milei.
We really have. We've looked at this relentless critique of the state as the main aggressor, explored the detailed explanation of how free markets and innovation are seen as driving growth, and covered that proposed radical monetary reform, getting rid of the central bank, 100% reserves, currency competition, the whole package.
So what does this all mean for you, our curious listener? After hearing this deep dive, maybe consider this provocative thought. If, as the book argues, every societal problem truly originates with the state, is radical freedom from virtually every tax, every regulation, every central bank, the only true path to a flourishing society. What would your world actually look like if the state were reduced to its absolute bare minimum function? We hope this deep dive has given you plenty to think about. Until next time.